This video is all about error handling middleware. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to write custom error handling middleware. So why do we handle our errors? Well, while there are three types of middleware, there are two sort of categories under which middleware can fall. The first is regular middleware. The second is error handling middleware. In our previous lesson, we worked with custom regular middleware, and now we're going to work with error handling. We handle errors to tell our users they aren't working with our software properly, or to report a problem so that they know that something is broken or taking a while. Take that 404 response that we built together earlier on in our lessons. That error handling response was, this route that you requested doesn't exist on our server. So ain't nobody got time for that was the message we sent back. I know we were having fun with that, but normally you send back like a full-on HTML page that you can sort of work with and tell the user that they have done something wrong, they need to change their URL. There are various instances in which you'd need to write error handling to tell the user that they messed up, but sometimes your server messes up and you need to tell the user that your server is messed up. Otherwise, they don't know how to work with it. So why and how to handle errors? So kind of piggybacking off of that last discussion, when our application encounters an error while executing middleware code, we can choose to hand over control to error handling middleware. And that's kind of how we're going to do this. So by calling next, we send it with a single argument. So it is very important that you understand this convention that you need to follow here. The convention for the single argument that you will pass to your next function will be the new error object with an error message that you can customize right there. Very similar to this one found right here on the screen. So a little bit more on handling middleware, error handling middleware. These type of middleware functions take in 4 different arguments, not 3, not just rec, res, and next, but just one more than what we're used to, right? So the first argument in the error object that we're passing to will be that error object that we send to the next function. So when that argument exists in the next function, Express just simply knows to go into the error handling middleware. So the other 3 arguments, of course, will be rec, res, and next. So when our error handling is done, what we can do is choose to end the request or call next without arguments to continue the next regular middleware. So remember, we will only be brought into error handling middleware if we pass an argument to next. So if that argument exists, then we're going to go into our error handling middleware where we have error, rec, res, and next. Error handling middleware can be placed anywhere in the stack, but if the intention is to have to handle errors that may occur at the middleware in the queue, then place it at the very end. Okay? So now the best place to learn this is just writing it together. So we're going to follow along with the tutorial that's found right here in Training Kit, and you can just write this along the side with me. Okay, so make sure that you open up your terminal and that you CD to the root of your directory tree. So to do that, you can just hit CD or CD tilde. Just make sure that you're back at the root by noticing this little tilde. We are going to build a brand new Express application. So go ahead and make dir. And we're going to call this Express handle errors. CD into that. And run an npm install or npm init --y, and go ahead and npm or yarn add express, and we're going to add this thing called path. Okay. Path is another package that you don't really need to understand exactly what it's doing at this point. You just are going to work with it, and we're going to talk about it along the way. go ahead now and touch server.js and open up your Node application, your Express application in Visual Studio Code. Now inside of our server, go ahead and write const express equals require express. Ooh, it always feels good building a brand new, fresh squeezed, fresh picked Express application from scratch. Make sure you require in path as well. And define our server by invoking express. And of course, server.listen. And then we're going to pass it a port of 5000, and we're going to say magic happening on 5000. Okay? Let us boot up our server and make sure that we're good to rock and roll. Yarn start will be the command that we can use to do so. And we've got some magic happening on 5000. If you want to go ahead and configure your server at this point to use NodeMon, you can kind of figure out how or go back to previous examples found during your daily lectures. But I'm just gonna, for all intents and purposes of this lecture, I'm going to make sure that I stick to just terminating and restarting my server as we go along. We're gonna write a funky little getter here. We're gonna write a little, not a getter, but like a server.get function to a URL that we call download. Download is gonna, of course, have its little middleware. And it's going to simply run some interesting operations here. So first, we're going to say the file path is going to be set equal to path.join, and then we're going to just pass these couple of arguments to it. First one is going to be the directory name, their name, and that's going to be then the index.html. Okay. And then we want to res.sendFile, file path. Now, path is a really cool package that allows us to work with static files on our machine and write files to our machine and read files from our machine. And it's really nice. It's really user-friendly. It's a good way to just basically send back our static HTML files. If you wanted to, you could write a bunch of HTML files here in Node and just have Node send them back to the client. So you don't even have to write a React app. That's more of an antiquated way of doing things, but file path is not just for writing files and sending them back. In that regard, it's really good for, downloading assets or, writing, your logs. You could basically just create a file on your system of logs of, just text of everyone who's used your application when and where. And then you could just save that file and continue to back up that file so you have a history of all of your stuffs. You could also just send JSON. You could do so many things with file path or with path.join. Path is something that I highly recommend you browse into on the NPM registry. So now if we go ahead and do a GET request to our download function, our server is going to crash. And it's going to crash because we have no index.html found in our file tree. So what we're going to do here is we're going to reset our server. We're going to test that. That's my theory. We're going to break our code. Our API is not going to work. So I'm going to pull open a brand new instance of Chrome. And we'll just kind of make this full screen. And we're going to do a localhost over to 5000. And not only do we need to restart our server. So kill that off, restart it, and we're going to send that up to download. That's where my problem was. Okay, so we've got an error that says no ent, no such file or directory stat, users, Ryan Hamlin, Express. We tried to find this index.html file. That's what we're trying to do. and we're trying to send that back to the client, which it doesn't exist. Okay. If it were to exist, it would just send back a really cool file. So let's see what it looks like if the file exists really fast. You don't have to follow along at this part. I'm going to just send back an H1 that says, hello from Express. And we'll go ahead and reset our server. I just am curious. I don't know what this is going to do. But my hope is that if I actually have that, we get our HTML file back, which is what we're doing. So you could potentially now go and serve all of your assets up and do all this cool stuff. But we're going to delete that because that's not what we want to be doing here. What is that? That is crazy. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Move to trash. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to modify our little request here. We're going to say if, because what we're getting, we're actually getting an error on this because that's what we're sending back. And that's what we're getting back to the client is that EONT file, ENOENT message. So we're going to double check to make sure that we have everything that we need in order for it to work. So one thing that we can do to send file is we can actually send a check, a little callback function that's going to check if there is an error in the thing that we want to send. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, the first argument that we actually send to file path or to this send file is the actual file path. And then this error function, error handling function is going to kind of fire if something is broken. Since there's a single parameter there, we can just make it look nice and neat. So now we're going to say if the error is defined, then what we want to do is call next. Now next isn't defined yet, so we need to add it into our middleware here. And we're just going to say new error, or just pass in that error at this point. So let's look at what we've done here before we finish this logic. So if there is an error, the callback function will get an error as its first argument. Send file can take in the thing that we're trying to send, but if that thing is error-fied, if you will, then this error will become valid, and we're now inside of this function block. So then if that error is actually defined, we're going to invoke next, and we're going to go into our next file or a next custom middleware. Okay. Else, we're just going to say that our file was sent successfully. So that way, we're just going to say console.log sent a string. There you go. Okay, so this should be handling our case where this index.html file doesn't exist. We get an error here, and we're handling that error properly. But now we need to write our error handling middleware in order to make this actually work well. So let's go and add error handling middleware to our server. We can create the middleware function and then use it like any other middleware, or we can do it inline. So we're going to do this inline for now so that we can kind of see this working together. So we're going to say server.use, and we're going to pass our error handling middleware here, just some custom middleware. We're going to have our error as our first argument, rec and res as our next, and then the next function as our fourth argument. Remember, error handling middleware takes in error. This error object right here will become this argument. This error object that we get back from here will become this argument. I can't say that any more times. This error object that we get back from send file is going to be this error argument. Okay? So we're going to bounce into this middleware when next is invoked here. And Express just knows how to do this. It's one of the baked in functionalities of Express. It just knows that when there's an argument supplied to next, it's going to find that middleware that is handling your errors. So what we need to do here is console.log.error. And of course, we're going to res.status. We're going to give it a 500. And then we're going to chain on our send method. And we're going to say, and we'll just actually make this a JSON message so it looks nice and pretty to us developers, because this is a message for developers. And we're going to say the message here is that there was an error performing the required operation. kind of just like make sure that we understand what's going on. And we're going to see a log of it in the console. You could also send this back. So let's just format this a little bit nicer and just send that error as well. So that we'll be able to see a nice little error message inside of our response. Okay. So the middleware is only going to get called if any other middleware or route handler that comes before it has called next with an argument like in our download route. Okay. So let's see this in action. Let's go ahead and refresh our server. Let's go ahead and make a request to download and look at that. Nice. Our message is there is an error performing the required operation. And then we get our nice error object, straight formatted in JSON. The code is there's an no-int. The error is that there's no response in -2, so I don't know what that is actually. But we get a status code of 404, meaning, hey, there's a file that's not found there. There's something that you're looking for. And then it's like, okay, you requested the path to send back express handle errors index.html, and then the status code of 404. Okay, so very, very nice error handling. There are two things in this world that make me really, really excited when developing software. One of them is beautiful error messages, okay? Error handling that just works properly. And this is all baked into Express because all we had to do is say, hey, if this error breaks down, go Express and find our next error handling middleware. And we know that it's error handling middleware because we have 4 arguments applied to it. Okay, it's that simple. It's that amazing. Okay, now let's make sure that we get this, and you can follow along here at this point. Create an index.html file. And let's say that we have an h1, hello from Express. And let's go ahead and refresh our server and make sure that we actually hit this condition here. I'm actually kind of nervous to see what happens. I think this might not be fully baked. Let's go refresh our server. And let's go request. And we actually get the response back. And let's see what happens in our network. Network will be a really cool place for you to look at everything here. And yeah, it's actually, everything is working the way that it ought to be working. Just take my word for it. At this point, we have a preview of our response that comes back. That's what we sent back. We sent the request over to download. It was a get method. Everything's looking really nice. We're going to learn a lot more about how to read the network tab in future debugging sessions. But yes, this is one way that you can start to play around with the amazing functionality that comes from Express.js. Now there's a challenge for you to write a piece of custom middleware on your own. And I want you to go ahead and try and solve that little challenge and apply this knowledge. This entire server, as it should be, is found in Training Kit, by the way. So if you got lost or anywhere along the way, you can go ahead and kind of reference that written code there.